This is a guide to measuring retention with Motif. We're working with the Motiflix dataset, which mimics the kind of events you'd see with a video streaming service. I am excited to talk about retention today. I love this topic. It can be confusing, and I think that's one of the exciting things about Motif is it's sort of like, Motif and the focus on time makes this kind of thing, really easy to work with and play with. So the first thing we're going to do, and this is going to feel pretty radical. Like when I started using Motif, I was a little bit worried about like removing events or removing things from my sequence. It felt like something I wanted to hold on to, but it's actually one of the superpowers that we can kind of, filter down and really clean up a sequence, and then we just comment out that code, and all of a sudden everything's back. So I think that takes some getting used to. But today we're going to, in measuring retention, focus on our key event. And for us, that's watch start. So that's people watching a video. We're also going to include sign up in that because it's sort of like the first touch that we get from you, and everyone has that touch. So it's a great anchor for starting our measurement of retention. So I want to measure both sign up and watch start. So I use the pipe, which is OR. But when I'm doing multiple events, I need to give it a label. So I'm going to call this key events, and then I put that in parentheses. And so now we're matching anything that's either sign up or watch start, and we're giving it the tag key events. And we're actually going to split on that. So this gives me sort of like every moment of retention split up. So for example, this user has 2 key events. This user has 4 key events. This user has 13 key events, and so on. And this is where the radical part comes in. We're going to take each of these sequences and we're going to replace them with just the key events. So this is essentially deleting everything that's not a sign up or a watch start. And this just makes now retention very easy to think about because I'm only looking at the key events in the sequence. And speaking of that sequence, we want to recombine it so we can see it for each person. So what I've done, I sort of broke apart our user sequence, reduced it down to just the events I care about, and then stitched it back together. And so now for every user, I see sign up and then every watch start. Great. Now something for retention is that anchor that I talked about, and that's going to be on sign up. So we're going to do match sign up to select that. And then we're going to set the start week for the user to time bucket. And if you watched the weekly active users, you're going to be familiar with time bucket, but this basically takes a date value and generalizes it into a date part, a day, a week, a month, an hour, whatever you want to do. In this case, we're going to bucket by week, and we're going to take that sign up event. Okay, so now for every user, we have their start week. Some people May, June, I think it goes back all the way to January. All right, so now we have some like sort of the start event, the anchor, and we have all the things that happened after it. And we're already kind of seeing retention in our head, right? We've got an anchor, and we've got all the different things out in space that are going to tell us our distance from that anchor and whether or not people retained. So what's that going to look like? So first it's going to look actually a little bit like the weekly active users that we did. So we have this kind of idea of an active week, and those are going to be anytime someone was active. And we're going to split on that. And that's because we want to, break every week up that a user was present. And how are we going to define that week? So if the time bucket, 1 week time bucket of the first event in the next sequence is greater than, is 1 week prior, basically, than the last event in the current sequence. So this is exactly what we did in the weekly active users because we wanted to understand these sort of like weekly buckets and whether they were different. So suffix means the event sequence behind the current one, and 0 index means the first event in that sequence. And then active week is my current sequence, and -1 index means the last event in my current sequence. And I need those to be different weeks. And that's what time bucket is greater than means, that these two are going to be different weeks. Great, and you can already see that for this user, we have their active week is going to, or their start week is going to be the same, but it's going to be split up by different active weeks. And just like we did with weekly active users, we can actually save that week into our sequence so that we can see it. So that's going to be the time bucket. Oops. 1 week of active week, and it doesn't matter which one I take, but I'll take the first value in that active week sequence. Okay, and then I want this to be minus, well, so that would be, well, let's look at that. So that's going to show me basically the week of activity. So this user, 520, 527, 610, 617, they're retaining every week. But rather than, because with retention, we want to kind of realign everyone as onto the same index and look at their behavior after they join. We actually want this to be a number and not a week or a date value. So we're going to subtract the start week from that. And so now we have the number of days between the current week and the start week. And then we can, this is kind of funny, but you can just divide by 1 week. And now we're going to get that in weeks. And so we can see this person was active during their initial week, then their first week later, third week, fourth week, fifth week. So they were not present during the second week, but did come back third, fourth, and fifth week. So now we can kind of see that retention, just like we were talking about. We're seeing, the start week, and then we see this index beyond the start week that someone was present. All right, so now let's go plot this and see what it looks like. So I'm going to go over to plot, and we have that week index that makes sense to put along the x-axis. And then you can already see, of course, everyone's there during their first week, so we have the full population, and then we see the drop-off here. Cool. So one way we could normalize this is by grouping or dividing by the largest bin. So if this is our full population and it's the largest bin, then we can divide that out. And of course, 100% of people will be present during their first week because we include sign up as a retention event. And then 60% present the first week, 61.7, and so on. Now, one thing I'm noticing is this steep drop-off, and if you remember in the example data, some of these people are very recent. So if you joined on 6/24, you're not going to have the opportunity to retain 18 weeks, but you are present in this very first bucket, the 0 week. So I'm going to do a filter, and this is a new command. So I'm going to say filter week is less than 10. So now we're only going to be looking at the first 10 weeks. Do less than or equal. The first 10 weeks that someone is able to use the app. And then I'm actually going to require that the start week is between let's say April 1st. Oops. Okay. So now I want start week to be between the beginning of the year and April 1st. And now everyone is eligible to be present for 10 weeks. So we have, actually what looks like a much better retention curve now that we've done this. So one thing I can do here is I can change, let's see, I'm going to bin this. And we've seen this before. Maybe this isn't going to work. There we go. If we make it a text value, it just makes it a little bit easier to read. And then I like looking at retention as a line. So in the first week, we have 100%, which makes sense because we include the sign-up event as something you can retain to. The first week, retention 62%. So that's not great. Ordinarily you'd want to see people coming back, really good. But we bounce back. So the second week, there's higher retention. And then the curve overall is pretty flat, which means that we're not being overwhelmed by churn driving this down. So that's actually a pretty good sign. Okay, so that's measuring retention in Motif. We did a few things today. We basically split by our key events, and then we deleted everything that wasn't a key event, and then put the sequences back together. And that got us these very simple sequences that only include the events we care about. And then we added a sign up week value or start week value so that we could anchor everyone on that start week. And then we did what we did in the weekly active user, where we created this sort of active week index. We did it a little bit different because we turned it into a number instead of a date. So we did some math to figure out our distance from that start week as an integer. And then we plotted that integer, and we filtered the chart down to look at the things we wanted to see. Great. I hope you're as excited about retention as I am.